The second reading session of 2022, in the beginning 6,000 years ago. The age of the Earth is 4.6 billion years, the age of the universe is 14 billion years. In 2017, during the personnel hearing for the candidate of South Korea's First Minister of SMEs and Startups, the candidate mentioned that the age of the universe is about 6,000 years. Most media outlets and people mocked him, claiming it was due to his ignorance of science. That being the case, is the claim of 6,000 years as opposed to the claim that the Earth is 4.6 billion years old unscientific, irrational, and illogical. The results of scientific inquiry must be established as a theory through logical thinking, and verified according to the most objective methods. For example, the laws of motion for moving objects were organized into a theory by Newton. He created a reasonable narrative for the natural phenomena he observed and organized the rules for how that narrative unfolds. Furthermore, to secure the logical validity of the story he conceived, he utilized mathematical tools. The greatest reason his theory is revered today is that it was logically organized using mathematical tools, and his laws of motion, including the movement of celestial bodies, have been confirmed through experiments by later inventions such as satellites. Meanwhile, in contrast to this, there is science that cannot be proven through experiments. These are the stories regarding the theory of evolution and the theory of creation, so-called origins science. In particular, the theory of evolution is based on the claim of British geologist James Hutton that the present is the key to the past, suggesting that judging by the facts occurring now, the past must have also been such and such from the very beginning. This assumes that the past was in the exact same state as the present, without considering at all the possibility that the past situation could have been one of rapidly changing chaos where something was created from nothing, such as the creation of the universe. It starts with the conclusion that the universe has evolved. For such a process of evolution, it is only natural that the Earth would require 4.6 billion years or even more time. The most commonly used method for dating the Earth is measuring the half-life of isotopes. When measured this way, it is said that the Earth likely began about 4.6 billion years ago. However, the Bible, contrary to this, says the age of the Earth is only around 6,000 to 7,000 years. The author does not intend to argue which of these is more scientific. Rather, I intend to speak about the misconception that the idea of the Earth being 4.6 billion years old is more scientific than the idea of it being 6,000 years old, or that the prejudice against the 6,000-year Earth theory, as being unscientific, is wrong. In conclusion, both the claim that the Earth came into existence through a 4.6 billion-year evolutionary process, and the claim that it came into existence because God created the universe 6,000 years ago are scientific, yet it cannot be asserted which one is correct. The theory of the birth of the universe proposed by evolutionary scientists likely has no fatal flaws in its scientific knowledge or logic. Similarly, the claim that the age of the universe is 6,000 years can be sufficiently explained with the scientific knowledge we possess. Thus, both claims are plausible theories based on science. Consequently, this is a matter of which one you believe, not a matter of which explanation is correct. The most representative method for measuring the distance between 2 points is using a ruler. A person's height is measured using a ruler to find the length between the 2 points of the top of the head and the tips of the toes. We determine the length of a 100 meters running track by measuring 100 meters with a tape measure. However, there are lengths of values so large that they cannot be measured with a ruler. Furthermore, it is inappropriate to use a ruler to measure the distance between the sun and the Earth. The same applies to the distance to the stars shining in the night sky. Another method of measuring length or distance is to project a light beam and measure by receiving the light reflected from it. Since the speed of light is known, the distance the light has traveled can be calculated through the flight time during which the light was projected and reflected. For instance, if the speed of light is 300,000 kilometers per second, and the time it takes for the projected light to reflect off an obstacle and return is 1 second, the round-trip distance from the point where the light was projected to the obstacle is 300,000 kilometers. Therefore, it can be measured that the distance to the obstacle is half of that, which is 150,000 kilometers. This method is the general principle of distance measuring sensors. As a familiar example, distance measuring sensors installed on car bumpers are applied in such a way that they measure the distancia between the bumper and an obstacle and trigger a warning alarm if that value is below a certain distance. A representative subject of measuring distance using the flight time of light is the distance to stars. Specifically, by using the luminosity, the actual amount of light emitted by a star related to its formation and the apparent brightness of that star. The distance to the star is measured by calculating the time the light emitted from the star has traveled. For this reason, distances to stars use units such as 1 light minute, representing the distance light travels in 1 minute, and 1 light year, representing the distance it travels in 1 year. In other words, if we are currently observing a star that was shining 10 billion light years away, it means that light has traveled for 10 billion light years to finally become visible to us. Thus, it is inferred that the star has existed for at least 10 billion years. However, is there no possibility that distance measurement through the flight time of light, a method for measuring long distances, could be distorted? To verify this, it is necessary to confirm that the time light has traveled is always a unique value. In the train featured in Einstein's thought experiment, there is a light-emitting device, such as a laser, at the center of the train. At equal distances from both ends of the train, there are mirrors that reflect the emitted light. When the switch of the light source is pressed, the laser light is projected toward the mirrors on both sides, and the mirrors reflect that light. First, let us consider the case of a stationary train. When the experimenter inside the train turns on the light source to reflect the light traveling in both directions flies the same distance, reflects off the mirrors, and returns. Simultaneously, an observer watching this experiment from outside the train sees the same phenomenon. In this case, both from outside and inside the train, it is observed that the light traveling in both directions reflects and returns at the same time. This time, let us consider a case where the train is moving rapidly in one direction. And, as in the previous experiment, if the experimenter presses the switch to fire the lasers, the light will again reflect simultaneously from both ends inside the train. However, when observing this from outside the train, due to the speed of the moving train, the light reflects later at the end toward the direction of travel than at the opposite end. The phenomena appearing outside and inside the train are different. In other words, while the light reflects simultaneously inside the train, it is not simultaneous outside the train. There are other examples where simultaneity is broken. On Earth, lightning may strike simultaneously in the east and the west, but from a spacecraft outside the Earth, the lightning flashes at different times. Here, based on the natural law of distance flight time speed of light, we can consider two things. From the perspective of someone outside the train, the fact that the timing of reflection at both ends, that is, the time the light arrives at both ends, is different, means we can think that the light traveling in both directions covered different distances. Alternatively, we can think that the light traveling in both directions flew for different amounts of time. Consequently, from the fact that the speed of light is constant, a phenomenon occurs where either time lengthens or shortens, or distance, that is, space, contracts or expands. This suggests that due to the scientific phenomenon of the speed of light being a limit speed, the time we measure is also not absolute. Because the world we belong to is a three-dimensional space where it is thought that only objects with mass can possess velocity, we perceive the speed of light as the limit speed, and we cannot measure time as an absolute reference. This can be further discussed through the light cone, which explains space-time. The sun is located at a distance of about 8 light minutes from the Earth. In other words, the sunlight we see now is the sunlight from about 8 minutes ago. If the sun were to suddenly disappear, the sunlight would vanish. The news that the sun has disappeared is conveyed to us as fast as the speed of light, which carries that news. Therefore, we would only know that the sun had disappeared 8 minutes later. If someone who saw the sun disappear from the sun itself traveled for 3 days by spacecraft to deliver that fact, a person who could not see the sunlight would only know that the sun had disappeared. After 3 days, that is, the point in time when we become aware of the event of the sun's disappearance, is determined by the speed of the messenger delivering that news. Meanwhile, since the fastest speed we can know is the speed of light, the earliest time we can encounter an event is determined by the speed at which light travels. An event thought to be appearing now is not actually happening now, but is appearing now after the event that occurred in the past has been transmitted through light. In other words, we think that an event which occurred in the past is happening in the present. And those who estimate dates consider the speed of light delivering that news to speculate how long ago from now that event took place. Everything we know must be occurring only within the cone that has the speed of light as its boundary on the diagram of space and time. In other words, events occurring in the present are confined within a cone-shaped range, that is, the future light cone, where they can be confirmed in the future. Meanwhile, an unauthorized path would mean knowing that the sun has disappeared in 4 or 3 minutes instead of 8 minutes, which is an unauthorized path for us who have no messenger that travels faster than light. Objects with mass move slower than the speed of light. Therefore, the movement of three-dimensional objects with mass is always confined within the future light cone. In other words, the scope of our scientific inquiry is within the future light cone. Let us conduct a specific experiment regarding distance and time measurement based on the flight time of light, which is the most fundamental method for measuring the age of the universe. In Figure A, what is the distance between point A and point B? Is it S1 or is it S2? S1 is a shorter path compared to S2, and this is called a shortcut. However, since a bicycle cannot use the highway, a shortcut like S1 is meaningless to a person on a bicycle. To the cyclist, the distance between point A and point B is, in any case, only S2. This time, let us consider the case of Figure B. The distance to a star is so immense that it is impossible to project light toward the star and measure the time it takes for that light to reflect back. Instead, the distance is calculated by measuring the flight time it takes for the starlight originating from that star to reach the Earth. Although there is a slight difference from the method of using a distance measuring sensor, the fundamental principle measuring distance by the flight time of light remains the same. The light from star B arrives at star A through path 1, which appears to be the shortest distance. In this case, star B can be seen from star A. In this instance, the distance from star A to star B is measured as L1. However, if the light arrived at star A through path 2, the distance from star A to star B is perceived as L2. Since light travels in a straight line, it moves through the shortest distance between 2 points. This also means that the path light travels is the shortest distance. Consequently, regardless of which path the light took, we measure the distance to that star through the time the light has traveled. If light travels via path 2, then path 2 is the shortest distance. In the figure, path 2 looks like a roundabout route, but we consider it the shortest distance. Path 1 would be a path in a dimension unknown to us. In other words, path 1 is a path that does not exist in the three-dimensional world we live in. However, according to scientific achievements discovered in the early 20th century, the progression of light in outer space can indeed involve traveling via path 1. This is the so-called phenomenon of the curvature of space-time. This is based on the general theory of relativity, first explained by Einstein. To fly to a star 100 light-years away, it would take 100 years, even if the spacecraft's speed were the speed of light. However, it is said that if a spacecraft passes through a wormhole, a shortcut in the universe like path 1, it can travel much faster than the path we previously knew. Passing through a wormhole to fly to a very distant star is also a frequent subject in science fiction movies. Let us apply this story to the discussion regarding the age of the universe. The birth date of the universe is estimated by calculating the size and the age of the universe based on the brightness of stars. For instance, observing a star that is 10 billion light-years away means that the star has existed since 10 billion years ago. Thus, the logic follows that the universe has existed since at least 10 billion years ago. However, what if that light, as mentioned before, took a roundabout route like path 2? No one can confirm that such a possibility is not the case. Such a possibility can be an assertion based on the results of scientific inquiry known as the curvature of space-time, which was discovered in the early 20th century. Nowhere in outer space does there exist a present that everyone experiences identically. Just as one intuitively knows that a person struck by an express bus traveling at 100 kilometers per hour would suffer fatal injuries, the fact that time flows differently depending on the speed of motion is intuitive to those who have studied modern physics. Furthermore, this phenomenon allows us to imagine a world where space-time is curved. The movie Interstellar is a story about the quest to find a new planet where humanity can survive. In the story, there is a scene involving the exploration of a planet found by a vanguard team. After exploring a planet near a black hole for a short time and returning, the explorers meet their colleague who remained on the main spacecraft. Although they returned after exploring for only about an hour, 17 years had passed on the spacecraft. Time flowed differently in different areas of outer space. Another example of time flowing differently appears in the movie. The protagonist, returning from his space exploration, sees his daughter, who was a young child when they parted, as an elderly woman much older than himself, facing her final moments. This means that 100 years we perceive could be just 1 minute in someone else's space. The scientific reasoning of evolutionary scientists that 13.9 billion years are required for the universe to be created through evolution could also, quite scientifically, be a period of a mere week. In other words, the news of the creation of heaven and earth taking 13.9 billion years to be transmitted can be valid within the future light cone. However, there is also a path through which the news of the creation of heaven and earth is delivered in just 6,000 years. Since the interior of the future light cone is a system of knowledge we obtain within the limited environment of 3 dimensions, it means we perceive the age of the universe as 13.9 billion years. But we cannot assert that the age of the universe is 13.9 billion years. This is just like saying that leaves have turned into autumn colors in the middle of summer, simply because they look red through red-tinted sunglasses. Consequently, while there is some objective value for the point of the creation of heaven and earth, or rather, the age of the universe, or the point when the universe came into existence, it is reasonable to say that because we are confined within a 3-dimensional light cone, we may perceive or think of it as an excessively long period of time. That is correct. We must not think of the fact that the creation of heaven and earth occurred, and the fact that we became aware of its occurrence, as the same issue. Above all, for the claims of the universe being 13.9 billion years old or 6,000 years old to be meaningful, the standards by which they were measured must be clear. However, until now, nothing has been known regarding such standards. Rather, just as one might think they met a man by chance at a bus stop, only to find out later that he had been waiting for 2 hours, we have estimated the age of the Earth to be 13.9 billion years. By mobilizing all available scientific knowledge, but it is possible that, in reality, the Earth was created 6,000 years ago. Furthermore, such an assertion is not a preposterous imagination or a mere hope, but is based on the scientific knowledge we possess. 2. Records concerning the origin of the universe. The Bible is not a book of metaphors or suggestive records, but a book that records historical facts. The value of a history book lies in its content, which is verified through historical research based on objective and rational interpretation. Annals of the Joseon Dynasty is a representative history book of South Korea. This book is highly valued by many historians, both domestically and internationally, for its objective and truthful recording of the deeds of the kings of the Joseon Dynasty and historical facts. Even if the personal emotions of the recorder are involved in historical content, causing the details to be slightly exaggerated or understated, the content is not intended to imply or metaphorize something. For instance, the historical record of Admiral Yi Sun Sin's Battle of Myeongnyang is not said to be a metaphor or an allusion to a great defeat of the Japanese forces, rather than being a fact. It is a recorded fact in world history that Nebuchadnezzar, the conquering monarch of Babylonia, occupied Judah. Meanwhile, the Bible states regarding this fact that God would allow Nebuchadnezzar to take possession of Judah. The biblical record and the records of history books coincide. Furthermore, both general history books and the Bible describe the fact that King Nebuchadnezzar wandered the fields like a madman in his later years. However, regarding the cause, general history books only speculate with common sense interpretations that we can understand, or they omit the fact because it is uncertain, or because the credibility of the fact itself is considered low. But the Bible, along with that historical fact, states that the cause of the historical fact was God's judgment on Nebuchadnezzar's arrogance. This is the content of Daniel chapter 4, verses 29 to 33. God governs all that he does, that is, everything that happens between people, and he uses people for those works. Therefore, while the Bible is a history book that records the stories of events occurring between people, which we understand as history, it is also a book that describes how God governed those events behind the scenes. Just as we approach any other history book, we must not understand or misinterpret the contents of the Bible as metaphorical or suggestive, simply because they are difficult to interpret with our common sense or knowledge. In particular, Christians believe that the contents of the Bible were inspired by God. This means that the Holy Spirit worked so that there was no filtered content, even by the emotions or thoughts of the writers who recorded the Bible. Of course, there are parables in the Bible. However, those are cases where Jesus specifically stated that they were parables. The Bible records that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. However, there is an assertion that the day during creation was not the same day we calculate today, that is, the time it takes for the earth to rotate, but rather a different period of time. The background of this claim stems from the idea that the time spent on creation as recorded in Genesis cannot be explained by currently known scientific facts, because it is excessively short. Such a claim assumes that the biblical record is not a fact, but a metaphor or an exaggeration. Furthermore, it fits the event of creation into uncertain scientific reasoning, rather than into the Bible itself. Had they chosen scientific facts that could explain the creation time spoken of in the Bible, they might not have resorted to such speculation. This approach treats biblical content that is difficult to understand, whether common-sensically or scientifically, as something that is not factual, but metaphorical or exaggerated. While this might be a method for knowing the Bible well, it is not a method for believing the Bible well. Meanwhile, the assertion that a day of creation must have been a very long period of time is a claim regarding so-called evolutionary creation. They base their argument on the fact that during the process of creation, the sun was created on the 4th day. Therefore, they argue there is no basis to define the length of a day prior to that, as the time it takes for the earth to rotate. Consequently, they claim that the first 3 days were not 24-hour days calculated by the rising and setting of the sun. However, there is a serious problem with such speculation. God created all things in heaven and earth in 6 days, and rested on the 7th day. And since God worked for 6 days and rested on the 7th day, He commanded us to do the same. If the first 3 days after the beginning recorded in Genesis were a very long time, then for the Sabbath we must keep. The first 3 days, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, should be very long, nearly billions of years, while the latter 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, should be calculated as 24 hours to reach the 7th day. In other words, shouldn't we work for a very long time that includes those first 3 days, and then rest for 1 day? To put it another way, we would have to abolish all the calendars we use, create a new calendar, and then observe the Sabbath. Rather, wouldn't it be more plausible that God set a day as 24 hours from the beginning, created the heavens and the earth according to that time, and then, from the moment the sun was created on the 3rd day, synchronized the earth's rotation around the sun to 24 hours? Of course, there is no clear evidence to prove that the claim of a long day, asserted by evolutionary creationists, is wrong. This is similar to the debate over whether the age of the universe is 13.9 billion years, or 6,000 years. However, here, let us consider how the 6,000-year theory based on biblical records came about. The time it took for God to create the heavens and the earth is exactly 144 hours from the beginning. And based on the biblical records of subsequent time, we can calculate how long ago the beginning was from now. As a specific method, the first step is to calculate the chronology presented in the Bible. The second step is to correspond the dates of events likely to have historical records with the time recorded in the Bible for when those events occurred after creation. That is, if biblical chronological records show that the Exodus occurred 2662 years after creation, and judging by the historical facts of Egypt or surrounding regions, the year of the Exodus was around 1400 BC, then we can consider that the heavens and the earth were created around 4062 BC. We can estimate the time of creation through the individuals appearing in the genealogies that have continued from the creation of heaven and earth recorded in Genesis until now. For example, from the passage stating that Adam fathered Seth when he was 130 years old, and that Seth lived for 912 years, and fathered Enosh at the age of 105, it is clear that 1042 years passed from Adam until after the death of Seth, that is, by adding the 130 years when Seth was born plus Seth's lifespan of 912 years. the time from the beginning until after Seth's death is calculated. Since the biblical record does not document every single aspect of human history, one might argue that there are missing elements in between. However, such things may have been omitted because they were not significant to the biblical record. Furthermore, even if such elements existed, the fact that it took 1042 years until after the death of Seth remains unchanged. Therefore, there is no logical flaw in our chronological measurement method. In this manner, let us calculate the time from the creation using the birth and death years of the ancestors appearing in the Bible. First of all, since Adam was born 6 days after creation, he was born in the very year of creation. Based on the contents of Genesis 5:1-32, and Genesis 11:10-32, Abram was born in the year 1940 after creation. Furthermore, according to the record in Genesis 21:5, Isaac was born in the year 2040 after creation. And the time when Jacob, the grandson of Abraham, migrated to Egypt following his son Joseph was the year 2230 after creation, when Jacob was 130 years old. This can be known through the contents of Genesis 47:28. Additionally, based on the contents of Exodus 12:42, stating that they resided in Egypt for 430 years, and then underwent the Exodus, the time of the Exodus is the year 2660 after creation. Many historians speculate that the period of the Exodus for the people of Israel was around 1400 BC. If that is the case, the Bible tells us that the heavens and the earth were created around 4062 BC, which is 2662 years before 1400 BC. This year, 2022, approximately 6084 years have passed since creation. In other words, the 6,000-year Earth theory is based on these grounds. As mentioned earlier, origins science lacks a clear method of scientific proof. It merely asserts probability based on scientific facts. The grounds for asserting the 6,000-year Earth theory, namely, the young Earth theory, are based on the historical records of the Bible, and its method of inference is also logical. Some Christian scientists argue from their scientific knowledge that since a period of 1 week is spoken of in the Bible, is too short for the Big Bang to occur, and the universe to be created, God must have created it over a much longer period of time. This is what is called evolutionary creationism. Evolutionary creationism is an idea that allows them to maintain the Christian faith they feel obligated to keep without compromising the scientific convictions they study. However, assertions like evolutionary creationism claim that the contents recorded in the Bible are not a record of facts, but rather a slight exaggeration or satire of the facts. It is even akin to dismissing the Bible as a collection of myths or folktales that distort the truth. The time required for the universe to be formed could be tens of billions of years, but it could also be formed in just a single day. And both of these estimations are sufficiently possible, even with scientific knowledge we possess. If anything, there is at least a record regarding the young Earth theory, which posits that the age of the Earth is 6,000 years. 3. Christian ideology. The reason we cannot believe the facts of the Bible as they are is not because of a person's scientific knowledge or convictions, but because of the schemes of the devil that hinder such understanding. The first instance of being enticed into disbelieving the Bible was the coaxing of Eve to disbelieve God's word that she would die if she ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There is plenty of arrogance that dismisses the facts recorded in the Bible as unscientific, and mocks them as nonsense, simply because they are difficult to accept through common sense. The miracle of the 5 loaves and 2 fish in the Gospel of Matthew is also often thought of as an exaggerated story that would only appear in the Bible. However, in reality, the miracle of the 5 loaves and 2 fish, that is, the ability to feed 5,000 people with 2 fish and 5 barley loaves, is something whose possibility can be sufficiently explained, even by modern science. Assuming the weight of the 2 fish and 5 barley loaves is about 1 kilogram, and given the speed of light as 300 million meters per second, the matter energy possessed by the 5 loaves and 2 fish, that is, the energy obtained when the entire mass of the matter is converted into energy, amounts to approximately 9,000 trillion joules. Furthermore, 1 J of energy equals 0.24 calories of heat. Therefore, 9,000 trillion J of energy is 2160 trillion calories, which equals 2,160 billion kilocalories. since it is said that 5,000 men alone ate food in the event of the 5 loaves and 2 fish. Nearly 20,000 people, including men, women, and children, shared the meal. Assuming the calories required for one person per meal is 1,000 kilocalories, about 20 million kilocalories is needed for 20,000 people to consume sufficient calories. However, from 1 kilogram of the 5 loaves and 2 fish, one can obtain about 100,000 times that amount of calories. Consequently, the possibility of the miracle of the 5 loaves and 2 fish recorded in the Bible can be sufficiently imagined, even with modern science as we know it. It is just that modern science does not yet know the method to completely convert the mass of matter into energy. This scientific theory is the content of the special theory of relativity, announced by Einstein in 1905. It is said that when this theory was first released, even Einstein himself found the results difficult to believe. However, through the power of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, people were able to surmise that the matter energy predicted by Einstein would be possible. Returning to the original discussion, through scientific methods, it is impossible to assert whether the Earth was formed through a 4.6 billion year evolutionary process, or was created by God 6,000 years ago. While one might be able to explain the probability of creation versus evolution, it is impossible to declare which one is correct. For instance, some people estimate that the universe originated from a Big Bang 13.9 billion years ago, but others may think that it could be a period of about 6 days. Of course, the estimations of both individuals would be the results of logical reasoning based on scientific theories. We cannot clearly prove through science that the universe evolved, or that God created the heavens and the earth. We can only gauge the possibilities using scientific knowledge. Science, like music or art, is another gift given by God for us to enjoy. Whether one uses it to deny God, or to be certain of Him, is the responsibility of the person using that tool, much like a person choosing to be a chef who cooks with a knife, or a murderer who kills with that same knife. If a Christian scientist, who has been studying science diligently to scientifically prove the facts of God and the Bible to the world, encounters a new scientific theory that makes it difficult to acknowledge God's work of creation and biblical facts, a theory that seems absolutely infallible, should that person abandon their faith because of the scientific theory they have newly learned. Consequently, was his passion for science merely a passion for abandoning his faith? That is not the case. From the very beginning, the attempt to prove the correctness of Christian doctrine through science was flawed. Biblical content, such as the facts of creation, is not something to be proven by science, but is to be believed through spiritual inspiration. The heliocentric theory discovered by Galileo does not negate or refute the contents of the Bible at all. Nevertheless, people of that time went so far as to call Galileo's claims the arguments of Satan. Of course, nowhere in the Bible does it say that the earth is the center of the universe. The reason Galileo's episode is treated as a significant event that exposes the loopholes of Christian doctrine is that it treats Christian doctrine as a mere Christian ideology agreed upon among people. Furthermore, it is in this same context that the significance of the creation science movement should be found. That is, just as a talented singer praises God with a beautiful voice, and a poet praises God with a beautiful poem, meetings of people who love and excel in science should evolve into gatherings that praise God through science. I am a Christian who believes in the records of the Bible. Our souls believe, as recorded in the Bible, that God created the heavens and the earth 6,000 years ago.